Okay, I'm going to try something new in response to the Syndicate Symposium that was on these last 2 weeks. Instead of typing out my a detailed response, I'm just going to sort of informally react and respond to the different comments of the commentators, and then make some suggestions and point to some new directions we might go uh, in the future. Okay, first, a response to Clayton Crockett. His comments are really quite easy to respond to. I think he and I share so much in common. In the second response that he gave after my comments, he emphasized again the point about belief. And I just want to say, because this is a concern that Hollis Phelps expressed as well, I definitely think that there's an aspect of belief to religion. People believe in certain things. So I don't want to discount that or get rid of it. But I also believe, as I tried to make clear in the book, that ritual engagement, emotional arousal, interactions, anticipations, all of our a religious person's embodied engagement with the supernatural agents that are relevant and interesting to his or her group, those are important as well. And that was the main point I wanted to make there. Crockett also brings up a couple of points which are of concern, I think, probably to all the commentators, and that the issues of the natural environment, ecological disasters, and injustice in the world, especially economic injustice between rich and poor. And one of the concerns that certainly has been driving me in my research, and I refer to an article that I've recently finished, which I'm going to post underneath this video for anyone who's interested to read, talks about how specifically evolved biases keep people from actually seeing the problem with the natural environment, or actually seeing their own biases related to the poor, classism, or to other outgroups, racism, or to other genders, sexism. And so all of these kinds of biases affect us because of the way we're evolved. We have to work hard to contest those biases. What I'm trying to say is that there's huge research that shows that there are also religious biases, tendencies to automatically interpret reality or something ambiguous that happens around you in light of the action of a supernatural being, a transcendent force that has intentions in some sense, even if it's more than personal, in which that cares about you and your group, some group of humans. Those dynamics automatically reinforce, they trigger, they activate the defaults to be antagonistic toward outgroups and to begin to make superstitious interpretations about the world, not based on natural, empirical, intersubjective cross-communal dialogue. And so we share the same concern, and the point I'm trying to add is that understanding these sciences can help us reach across and deal with all of these biases which are destructive in our world. The second commentator was Sarah Moody, and her as well I found very easy to respond to. I was not familiar with her work before, but it seems like we have a great deal in common. I appreciated the way she brought my work into dialogue with Bruin and Rollins. And just to say up front, I have not read Rollins' work, and it's important for me to say that up front because often it's very annoying for me when people who haven't read my book assume what other people have said is actually what's said in the book. So I should also say, even though I haven't read Pete's work yet, what I've heard about it is all good and encouraging, and I want to engage it. I think he and I have a lot in common as well, just like Sarah. But I think that here, Sarah, I would agree with Sarah's judgment still in relation to Pete. In one of the comments at the bottom of the symposium, he responds that his concern is not disrupting the sovereign God at the level of the imaginary, but at the level of the symbolic. Of course, I see that distinction. I'm interested in psychoanalysis too, especially in my other work on Deleuze. But what is important to me in this context is that even at the symbolic level, empirical studies have shown that when people begin talking about and are primed to think about gods, then that triggers and activates outgroup antagonism and superstitious interpretations, whether it's explicit or not. They may think, oh, I'm not doing this, but the empirical studies show that at the implicit level, they are in fact doing this. So insofar as we've discovered now how to challenge these biases, in my view, something that theologians can do to contribute to the ecological and economic concerns, is explicitly talk about the fact that when we don't challenge the biases, they're continually reinforcing each other at a deeper underlying level. So just to be clear, if in fact Pete Rollins is saying what it sounds like he's saying from the summary, then that would be my concern. If he's, I need to read his books before I make that judgment. Sarah Moody's project, it seems to me like we're very close, and she and I have been in touch and hope to do some future collaborative work together. The third person is Hollis Phelps, and Hollis had a similar concern that Clayton Crockett did about belief. And I certainly admit, I think, that in his second response, Hollis points out that I really do emphasize belief, and I certainly don't want to deny that. I think I do talk about belief quite consistently, and I would want to balance that with ritual, as I said before. He throws out the idea of play as a metaphor instead of having the talk, and certainly I like the idea of play. I think we need more than one metaphor. Play is a lot more fun than having the talk, although having the talk could also be fun. But there are lots of metaphors and ways of going about having the conversation or engaging one another on these really important issues. And I think Hollis and I, too, have a great deal in common, and I look forward to engaging him in his work more. He also, at the end, made the point about Dominic Crossan as a caution about reading biblical stories, that the point of Crossan, once again, is not that those ancient people told literal stories and we are now smart enough to take them symbolically, but that they told them symbolically and we are now dumb enough to take them literally. This is an interesting comment by Crossan, but again, I don't know what empirical warrant he has for that, because when we study the minds of people, especially in small-scale societies that are of the sort that seem to have been the way in which in the Upper Paleolithic our ancestors lived, they do in fact take things very literally. So this might make us feel better or something, but in fact the way the human mind works is it does tend to engage ambiguous phenomena in a way that jumps to the easiest guess. It must be an agent that's concerned about me or wants to hurt me or that I need to interact with in some way. That's just how the mind works. And if that's not taken literally, our ancestors would not have survived, right? So I think these sorts of nuanced points are important, but for me, what I want to contribute is saying let's not allow these other emphases, attention to psychoanalysis or to biblical interpretation in the present and so forth, to cloud the fact that this is really how the mind has evolved, and this does affect our biases, all of our biases, regardless of what religion we're in, if we don't have a religion. But we can learn to contest these biases just like we can racism or sexism or classism. And learning how to do those is hugely important for solving the big issues globally and locally, I think. So Hollis, yes, I do think it's time for theology to start playing, always playing. But occasionally, as we're playing, we might need to stop and have the talk, and vice versa, and explore other metaphors too. So the next commentator was Philip Clayton, and we certainly got a lot of energy around that one in the blogosphere. But rather than summarize what's already been in the first two comments, I want to try to push the conversation forward and respond to some of the comments that he makes in his last section. The point that he makes, he starts by saying in part one there that I think that theistic beliefs are fully explained by cognitive and biocultural factors. As I pointed out earlier, I don't think that they're fully explained. This is part of, even whether this does annoy me when people quote one sentence or part of a sentence from my book and not the rest of the sentence, which contradicts it. When they say that I'm saying things which I don't say, and when in fact I say the opposite, that is annoying. Doesn't mean that I'm in pain or that I'm angry, but it is annoying to have one's book read in that way. So I do not think it's fully explained. I think that in fact cognitive bias does help to explain, help to explain partially why people are so defensive about their supernatural agents and why they hold on to those beliefs even when there is inadequate evidence for them. So there is a difference between theistic and anti-theistic beliefs. Every human being is biased, but what makes atheists different is that they have challenged these particular biases, or they have personality styles, or are raised in contexts in which supernatural agents are not relevant, and so those evolved defaults are not activated for them. But certainly the vast majority of the population have that default, just like we have the default to be a racist, to not see other people from out groups in the same way we see in groups, and so forth. So this is a bias that we all need to be aware of and decide together when we need to contest them. Biases are not necessarily bad. The bias to protect yourself helps us survive. So there are all sorts of biases. Quickly responding to something keeps us safe. So bias itself is not bad. Everyone has them. The question is, as we adapt and move into the future in different contexts, which biases are not helping us anymore? And my argument is that the bias which we've all inherited, or most of us have inherited, are no longer helpful in a globalizing, pluralistic, ecologically fragile world. They were helpful for our ancestors holding together small groups, but now they're in growing number of contexts, they're not helpful. Secondly, Clayton points to the infantilizing of believers. I really see his point here, that the metaphor of the talk could be seen as infantilizing, and that was not my intention, but I really see his point there. My intention was to say we all need to talk about where gods come from and why people keep them around. Christians have their gods, and we understand why they keep them around. Other religions have their gods, or ancestor ghosts, or animal spirits in smaller religions, or Allah, or Buddha, or whatever. All of the biocultural sciences help us to understand where these come from mentally and culturally, why people hold them around. So I didn't mean some people are smarter or more mature than others. Certainly I don't claim that at all, but that this empirical data is really important for us as a whole in order to, and so having the conversation moving forward is important for especially the ecological issues and the economic issues, which I know Philip shares those concerns as well. When does science undercut theology? Philip asks, and gives a constructive proposal based on his book on the predicament of belief, which I have read. A good book, very typical Clayton kind of book, well argued, clear, concise, facing the challenges of Christianity, but then at the end continuing to hold on to the specific concrete beliefs of a particular in-group, Christianity, and detecting when there's an ambiguous phenomena, a supernatural, an agent that's person-like in some sense, which is exactly his view. He talks about F factors or functionalist factors. In fact, I would say probably there's no such thing as beliefs that are only alethic, only truth-related. All of our beliefs are emotionally affected, influenced by our context, our aims, our desires. But I see what he means. There are F factors which influence us. The question is, to what extent are those so powerfully explanatory that they lead us not to hold the belief anymore? That's what I see him arguing. So if we agree that that's what F factors are, then we go through the different levels that Philip sets up there. The L2 and L2 are vulnerable. We certainly do agree there, and under what conditions. He says they're vulnerable only when the correlations between their beliefs and the biocultural cognitive explanations are sufficiently high. In my reading of this literature, the literally hundreds of research articles from experimental psychology and cultural anthropology and other disciplines, I find statistically overwhelming evidence, and I'll come back to this later when I'm through with the presentations. I present some of this in the article. That's one of the articles that'll be below the video. I find this just a huge amount of evidence that does exactly what Philip wants it to do. Later, Philip says that every time that, let me quote him exactly and be sure that I read the entire sentence. Believers who he's talking about science. Okay, here it is. He says, what about L3 and L4? Believers who interpret their beliefs in that fashion, as he does. That a specific belief is rationally indicated for someone, quote, who has my experiences and reasons and therefore sees P from my point of view, end quote. The same is true when she claims that merely that the belief is rationally acceptable. Well, from the point of view, a philosophical definition of rational in that sense, of course I agree. For the Fang tribesman, it's rational. He or she has had the experience of the ancestor ghosts flying on banana leaves through the forest, and then their child is sick. So it's clearly rational from them, from their point of view, giving their experiences, to believe that P. And this is true for all religions. Given their experiences, their ritual engagement, what everyone around them believes, it's rational for them to believe that. I have no problem saying that. The question is whether it's plausible intercommunally, whether it makes sense once you're in a pluralistic context where you're no longer ritually engaged and you're learning to contest supernatural beliefs, superstitious interpretations of causal, appealing to causality that can't be explained in normal empirical terms. Then it's not rationally acceptable in a larger pluralistic context. That's my argument. I do definitely think it would be an interesting debate. I'd love to come to California and have that conversation with you, Philip. In section 4, you say, interesting science-religion dialogue has two sides. The one side consists of the kinds of tight and testable empirical correlations that make science worth our attention. And this is the sort of literature I quoted in my book, of which you gave no examples, and which in the article I give several more. In my current writing project, it gives dozens and dozens of more examples. Then you say science has won many contests against religion on this basis, and where it wins, I'm on the science side. And I know you are, Philip, because I've read your work. My question would be, when has science ever not won? Is there ever an example where during one of those contests, religion has won? I don't know of any. You say that I've not given you enough in the book of examples of science winning. That would fill libraries and libraries, as you know. And my book was not about all the examples in which science has won. It was on a completely different topic, dealing with issues like where the problem of evil comes from, which I try to solve or dissolve in chapter 4. All sorts of arguments that I did make, which were not, in fact, giving lists of how science beats religion and theology in those kind of contests. The final thing you say is that when you read some theologians who both you and I know and respect, that you'll never be tempted to see religious beliefs as simple propositions. I certainly don't think that all religious beliefs are simple propositions, and I have a huge value for theology. My whole argument is that iconoclastic trajectory of theology is valuable, can help us, is important in a way that many of the new atheists don't see. But again, my concern is the same one that it was with the earlier respondents in the comment I made with Pete Rollins. If we don't pay attention to the way in which continuing to talk about person-like or at least personal agents beyond in kind of ambiguous hidden ways that everyone can't see, as long as we keep talking that way, we are activating biases that intensify outgroup antagonism and superstitious interpretations. And this has been shown statistically to be more relevant and more the case with religious believers than it is with non-religious believers. And I'll come back to some empirical examples in a minute. But I do thank Philip too for his comments and look forward to the next phase of the conversation. So the final commentator was Aku Visala, and I have to start by saying that actually it was originally Vasala and Kelly James Clark, and that my response that I published and sent in to Syndicate was a response to both of them, and so and it was edited later to say just Aku. I don't know why Kelly James Clark took his name off at the last minute. But certainly my response sounds a little more hostile than it did when I was saying they and so forth. It sounds less hostile than he. But nevertheless, the point is still there. My concerns, as I've already raised on the blog, is that sometimes, like Clayton, Vasala says things that I don't say, like when he claims that on page 110, I say that Plantinga's defense of warranted theism assumes the existence of God. I do not say that on page 110 or anywhere else in the book. The petitio principii fallacy has many different forms. Given the actual argument that I set out in the book, in that whole section on genetic fallacies and phylogenetic fallacies, I thought it was clear that I was referring to an informal form of that particular fallacy. And this is what concerned me about the response from both of the theists, that they didn't deal with the actual argument of the book, which has to do with abductive inferences, not deductive or inductive. So we're not proving something, we're not showing its probability, we're saying what's plausible given the vast empirical evidence across cultures, across communities. In my response to Vasala, I talk about another book by De Cruz and De Smet, one which I like very much, and I've also posted the first draft of the article on their book, which will be coming out hopefully in a few months, for anyone who's interested to read that. In my book on page 110, which he refers to, when I am discussing Plantinga very briefly, the phylogenetic fallacy, I point out that Plantinga does claim that Christians have more evidence than naturalistic scientists because they can make supernaturalistic observations. He does make that claim. And this is, of course, the sort of claim that Aku completely ignores. So for me, if we're going to have the conversation, we need to pay attention not just to kind of abstract beliefs about whether a transcendent force that's more than personal exists. We need to talk about the real effects of actual religion and the way people react to beliefs in supernatural agents, which lends them to say things like Plantinga does, that Christians have more evidence because of they have input from supernatural agents. And not to admit that he says that and to ignore it doesn't help, I think, push the conversation forward. At the end of that section on phylogenetic fallacies, I ask the question, which is more plausible, in fact, that the proscriptions and prescriptions by which one of the Abrahamic coalitions has inscribed the social field are in fact authorized by a supernatural agent who will also judge all other coalitions according to eternally grounded but only recently revealed moral standards. That's the basic Christian hypothesis. Or that this coalition is held together by the same temporally evolved hypersensitive mechanisms that condition all such sociographically prudish coalescing by engendering shared imaginative engagement with psychologically interesting and politically interested supernatural agents. So that's the key question for me. Which of these is more plausible when you get out of the dialogue only from within a particular religious group? So now let me try to move the conversation forward beyond just the content of the blog. I hint at the end of my response to Aku about retroductive inferences. And in the article that I've posted, the other article that I posted below on the video, I spell out this in more detail. Retroductive arguments are also hypotheses, like abductions, but they're about the conditions without which a phenomena could not be or become as it is. So they lead back, retroducere, from more or less plausible hypotheses to determine the existence or the conditions for the existence of the thing itself. Now, in fact, science does this all the time. People do it all the time, and so do scientists. Take, for example, in the 18th century, most physicians believed in the existence of humors in the blood and other bodily fluids that affected human temperature. And temperament and disease. And during the 19th century, most physicists believed in the existence of ether, an unseen medium through which light allegedly travels. Now, today, in the 21st century, scholars in these fields have no problems claiming that ether and humors do not exist. They make retroductive inferences. These things don't exist. They have no explanatory power. To take an example more directly relevant to the topic of biocultural study of religion, Paul Bloom, in his book on Descartes' baby, explains the evolved mechanisms that generate ideas of immaterial entities like a soul that can be separated from a body. Excellent book, which I highly recommend. He explicitly claims on page 12 that, quote, Descartes was mistaken. We do not have immaterial souls. So he's denying the existence of immaterial souls. But then later in the book, he reassures religious people by saying, quote, all of this is logically separate from the question of whether God exists. So he has no problem retroductively inferring that there's no Cartesian ghost in the machine. But why then the reticence not to straightforwardly reject hypotheses about ancestor ghosts in the forest, for example? It's this unwillingness to push the logic of retroduction further that I think is a result of all the evolved defaults and the coalitional and cultural pressure not to face and point out these particular biases. We can challenge racist biases, sexist biases, classist biases, homophobic biases, but to suggest that someone has religious bias is perhaps the next territory into which we're forbidden and I'm suggesting must now go. Finally, I want to make a couple of comments about the other article, How to Survive the Anthropocene, Adaptive Atheism and the Evolution of Homo Deaparensis. Here's where I give some of the literature that shows how cognitive biases affect people's ability to interpret and even perceive climate change or economic injustice. And just in the last few years, scientists have done empirical studies, psychological experiments, and other types of studies showing how and why people have biases that keep them from registering and much less acting in relationship to the problems of climate change and economic injustice. Then I give lots of examples of how religious biases are also underneath triggering these two problems. One, I also bring up in this article something that I had thought that I dealt with in the book, but perhaps not enough, that the way we are clear about the use of the word religion is really key. When I say religion, or when many people say religion, they mean all sorts of things. They mean ultimate beliefs, they mean meaning in life, awe at the universe, and so forth. So one can use words however one wants to, as long as you're clear. What I try to say, and perhaps I need to be even more clear, is that I'm only pointing to a specific aspect of religion, which in fact has been discovered in all known cultures. And this is widespread shared imaginative engagement with axiologically relevant supernatural agents. And that this aspect, or this particular aggregate of features, which for the sake of simplicity, I'm calling religion in these contexts, because that's the way in which cognitive scientists and cultural anthropologists that I'm dealing with, that's how they use the word. So when I realize it's a narrow definition of religion. So we can call it something else if you want to, but it's these sets of biases and coalitional forces that I'm talking about. And they do, in fact, reinforce the problems. I give several examples in the bibliography, which you're welcome to look at. Both of the way in which biases affect concerns about climate change and other things, as well as religion. Just to point to a couple, Labouf, Rowett, Johnson, and Finkel, differences in attitudes toward outgroups in religious and non-religious contexts in a multinational sample. So this was massive research done showing how particularly triggering people about their thoughts about God automatically led them to be more hostile toward outgroups. There are literally dozens of examples of research of this sort. And in the book that I'm working on now, I go through many of them. Scientists have known for decades that religion is associated with prejudice, but now they're starting to understand why exactly, what mechanisms are triggering and mediating that particular prejudicial attitudes among the religious people. Another example would be, you can see the Ramsey, Peng, Shen, and Rowett is another example that illustrates that. Religion and Intergroup Conflict by Newberg and colleagues. But notice the one by Reed and Clark. Effect of religious contexts on the content of visual hallucinations in individuals high in religiosity. So a person high in religiosity, when they're activated to have hallucinations, and someone else who's not high in religiosity is activated in the same way, both have hallucinations. That's just a natural part of human realities, part of the schizotypic scale. But religious people automatically imbue those forced hallucinations as examples of the supernatural agents that are holding their in-group together. So this seems to me to be the sort of example that Philip was asking for. Another one, Uwe Schutt and colleagues, Cognitive Resource Depletion in Religious Interactions. This is one of, again, several dozen articles that show, empirical research that shows when people engage in rituals, when they're moving synchronically and emotionally aroused and confronted by an authority figure, their brains actually are not able to process and think critically. So they become more susceptible. They're in sort of pseudo-hypnotic states. So regularly engaging in rituals shapes and changes your bias about what you're actually interpreting. When an apparently causally opaque event is happening, a ritual, you're not really sure what's going on and your critical thinking is turned off. I'm not making this up. These are the empirical studies that science demonstrates. Just a couple of examples of them. Some of the others are there as well. And we could certainly love to discuss them. I plan on doing that in my next book. So I want to thank all of the commentators for their comments. And it was certainly a very interesting, exciting, energizing 2 weeks. And anyone who would like to make comments or continue the conversation here on my blog, please do. But I, as always, just ask you, if you haven't read the book, please don't take it for granted that what someone said is actually what the book argues. But nevertheless, still, please feel free to be part of the conversation. Thanks for listening. That took a lot longer than I expected it did, and this may not end up being the greatest way to respond, but we'll see how it goes, and look forward to hearing any comments and seeing those of you who've responded, meeting those of you I haven't, seeing those of you who I have, again, at conferences soon. Thanks.